remember. Oh.
I was like, wow, somebody's, mashallah, somebody's really enjoying.
Yeah. It was like the biggest grade ever.
Yeah. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Okay, so last time we had, well not last time, the previous time we had started talking about how to deal with loan reports. So going through the conditions for a sound hadith. What are those conditions? The first? No. Conditions for a sound hadith.
Oh, okay, trustworthiness.
Okay, trustworthy narrator. What else? What's the second? Precision. Good. Third? A connected chain. Fourth?
No mistakes.
Hidden defects, right? Hidden defects. Because mistakes, we said, can come from? Not from trustworthiness, from precision, right? No, jazakallah khair. I'll try to chew quietly. It's for the gram, right? Is that how it works, right? They watch people eat. So this hidden mistake. What is a hidden mistake? How do I find it? So I have to cross-reference at that point. And I compare it to other reports, and then comparing it to other reports will give me a mistake where? Either in the text or in the chain itself. So some samples of some mistakes is like if I compare a couple chains, I'll see that there's a narrator that was omitted. And where do I see it? I see it in the comparative chain. Or if there's a mistake in the text, I can compare the two ones and be like, okay, well that's he connected this chain to a different meta and to a different text, and it's wrong. It shouldn't be like that. So that's taking care of hidden defects. What if I don't have anything to compare it to? This is the last condition, which is what?
Loan reports.
Loan reports. Now, is having a loan report in and of itself a reason for a hadith to be rejected? No, it's not. What else do I need additionally in order to reject that loan report? Basically, what am I trying to prove?
It's sound.
Right, I'm trying to prove if the hadith is sound. And we said that with the first condition of the hadith, the first condition of a sahih hadith, it helps remove which of the two possibilities when we deal with pieces of information or news? The lying portion of it. So we remove the lying portion of it. Every other subsequent additional layer that we've added here is to minimize what? Mistakes. So now I'm at a point where I have this loan report and I'm trying to verify it and prove that this report is not a what? It's not a mistake. And we said that there are 4 ways to do that. What is one of the first things that help me determine if this narration is correct or not? What are some outside criteria that I can look at?
The impression of the way it was said, like if it doesn't line up with
okay.
vernacular or like.
Okay, so there's a few things, right? And I think it's actually a very nuanced approach, and I can appreciate that. But basically, what Imam is mentioning here is that understanding the method and the way that the Prophet ﷺ spoke, that gives me insight into whether this report is prophetic or not. Also, we know that certain companions narrated certain types of hadith. And now if this hadith falls outside of the type of hadith we know a companion to narrate, that gives me what? Right, it makes me suspicious and doubt that. Saying that, and even at every level, so now not only do I have certain companions narrating certain types of hadith, even their students will narrate what? They'll narrate that hadith. If they have multiple shuyukh, so you have Sa'id ibn Musayyib, for example, a very famous tabi, very famous student of the companions. He had multiple teachers who were companions. So his hadith will overlap all of those different companions. Does that make sense? So his spectrum might be broader than the hadith of Abu Hurairah's alone. Does that make sense? Because he learned from multiple companions. And he took their narrations and he carried them forward. Sometimes you only have a tabi who studied maybe with one sahabi. Sometimes with 2, sometimes with more, sometimes with just, you know what I mean? Just they heard 1 or 2 reports. And the rest of them they took from other tabi'een, they took from other students of the companions. So understanding the placement, understanding who is saying it, how it's being related, this is definitely a very nuanced approach to that. What other things can I look for to help me determine if this loan report is sound or not? Or if it's problematic? What was the first thing we spoke about last week?
The first,
Umum al-balwa. What does that mean?
Is it an issue as important? And then this is the place.
Right? Is it an important issue? So what are some types of narrations we would expect a lot of information about?
halal, haram.
I'm sorry?
Halal and haram.
Things that have to do with halal and haram. Specifically what?
About the salawat.
Oh, right, about the pillars of Islam. Right? The pillars of Islam, I would expect to have more reports about the pillars of Islam than I would to have about the branches concerning it. The major things that are prohibited. The major things that are prohibited. So would I expect a lot of narrations on lying and stealing? Yes or no? Yes, right? Because these are big, problematic, major sins. So having more reports on those things that are faced by more people, it makes more sense. And this is why it was the first condition that we had spoken about. Because it becomes much more like if I have a hadith on zakat, and it's a lone report, and it's contradicting all of the other narrations, can I trust that narration? No. Why? Because this is something that it's something that's critical, something that's already talked about, something that's established. You have so many people narrating on the subject. Does it make sense you would have one or two people who would go against what everybody else is saying? Like, would it make sense today for us to have a chain of narration and be like, no, well actually I have this one chain that says zakat is actually supposed to be 3%. Would that make sense? No. Why? Because you have this vast encyclopedia of narrations that talk about zakat being fixed at on liquid assets for 2.5%. Or there being some sixth prayer that we didn't know about, right? Or Hajj, being able to make Hajj on, not during Al-Hijrah, but you can make it in Muharram too if you need to. Right? It's like, these are things that we can't even imagine happening. Why? Because there's so many people who would face this issue.
Basically evaluating the hadith.
Huh?
Evaluating the hadith.
Yeah, this is a way to evaluate the hadith. So like, what subject is this hadith talking about? Is it something that many people will face? And the opposite of that is like, okay, well this isn't really a common issue. And if it's an uncommon issue, the likelihood of there being lone reports is what? Lower or higher? It would be significantly higher, right? If it's not an issue that people face every single day, what are the chances of there to be a report on this issue, right? Versus something that we face daily where we expect a lot of reports. So this is one way to help us grade these hadith. Also precision, which is what we're going to spend time with talking about today.
Is there
Uh-huh.
an example of hadith like that?
Sure. I had mentioned it last week. So basically, the idea for paying blood money, this is established. This is well established. Like the timeline.
I had a question.
Yeah.
The blood money, you said, does the family tell them, or is there a certain amount, or how does it work?
There's a fixed amount. There's a fixed amount. Yeah. So when you talk about blood money in Islam, these are all fixed values that the Prophet ﷺ gave, either whether it be in gold or in cattle.
How much? Or
Yeah. There's different amount. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said the blood money for the death of an individual is 100 camels.
100 camels.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a lot of camels, right? So it's 100 camels. So does that mean 100 camels equals life? No, right? It's just financial compensation for whatever whatever happened, or for the death of the individual. And we said, who is responsible for that? We said the aqila, or the family, is the one that's responsible, not the actual individual. Also, there's another layer that can be extra. I'm sorry?
Like, why the whole family, not the individual?
Because it's too much of a burden on one person, and considering it's an accidental death. Right? Well, not even if it's an accident, even if it's purposeful, like the money still falls on the family. So there are certain things that tie people together that make an obligation on the entirety of the family. And not just that, if I know that there's a chance, for example, that my brother he's going to fight somebody. Because of the repercussions of the fight, I'm going to want to stop him. Why? Because I'm not trying to pay, right? Like, So do you see how it creates, like, the social sense of responsibility? It's like, because many times what happens when, like, we have family members who get into a fight with someone else? We have the urge to what?
Stop them or
Got you back.
Like, I got you back. Like, we have the urge to jump into the fight and actually support the family member. But if you think about the aqidah system and the way that it's set up, it's actually a what? It's a preventative measure. It's like, did you hear what he said? It's like, yeah, I heard what he said, but I ain't trying to pay that money. Let's get, so these are the kind of things to help create like those social repercussions. Yes, maybe.
Was there an issue like pre-Islam
Mhm.
like family feuds.
Of course.
That went on
Of course. Of course.
decades.
Yeah. Absolutely. And sometimes they wouldn't even remember why the feud started. It was absolutely ridiculous. So again, like you have a lot of these ideas of trying to either come to terms with those feuds or minimize the reasoning or the cause for those feuds, which is why you have that system in place. The only other, unfortunately, like this system kind of broke down, through time. Is there anything that we have in parallel today that would mimic this support system or this financial structure?
Like, accidental, I mean, the car crash or something like that.
Yeah. So what do we call that? We call it insurance, right? So the insurance, but in the thing that's tying me, so in the aqidah system, the thing that ties me to other people is blood. The insurance, what ties me to
You being like,
The other insurer,
the other insurers, like the people who want to willingly participate in that pool. But I don't want to get into too much of an insurance discussion. But it is definitely a financial safety net that's there, and it is something that's important within the Muslim system.
So was the piece of this that like there was just
Oh, I never even finished. Yeah, yeah. Like, I didn't even get to my point. So anyway, so the amount was fixed, right? Because you have so many hadith that talk about blood money. So the amount that the person is owed is going to be fixed. But the question that comes in, because most people, when the punishment came, right? Or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say punishment, but like when the ruling came, the family would come forward and they would pay. There weren't, because it falls on an entire family, it wasn't very common for an entire family to not be able to pay. Right? Does that make sense? Is that fair? So now you have a poor family that comes forward and they're like, well, we can't pay. How much time do we have?
Is there
Was it like 3 months?
3 years.
Or 4 months?
It was 3 years. It's 3 years, and this hadith is a lone, unique, weak report.
the Hadith is saying it's 3 years?
Yeah.
It's actually not.
No, I'm saying this is the only report we have
Of any time.
of any kind of timeline or time stipulation that's put there. So is that a good example? Does that help?
It does, but it just confuses the matter more, right? So what?
Mhm.
Like, do you take
So is there no time? It has to do immediately then?
So there's only two choices in this case, right? If I don't have a report, like either I dismiss the report, and then what conclusion can I take if I dismiss the report? That there's no timeline. I could pay one camel every 3 years.
Pay what you can.
Pay what you can.
At the mercy of like
Mhm.
the family,
Yeah, and
and then determining the timeline.
exactly. And then you have to like negotiate some kind of timeline. Versus if there's a state stipulated timeline, what happens? Right? It's like this is what's going to happen in that situation. So that's one example, like putting a timeline behind some of these things. And again, because that's an issue within an issue. Right? The one that is established is the blood money. Right? There's no difference of opinion on that. But putting a timeline behind it, this is where you will have a difference of opinion. Like, is this lone, weak, independent report something that we should take and utilize? Yes, because it seems to be like there's a greater benefit in this, and when you put a timeline behind something, it actually encourages people to pay. Precision. So here, is it possible that you have a student who spent more time than some of his peers with a teacher? Yes. So even my class, right? So my Tazkiyah class, I have some of you've been with me from the beginning. And some of you joined me later on. And then sometimes we have new faces. And it's very common to have these rotating students within a general gathering. Which students are you going to trust more when you have that type of rotation? The ones who have been with the Sheikh? From the beginning. The ones who have been with him the longest. Why? Because it's very likely that they have reports on him, or they have a hadith that they can narrate from him, that the newer students, don't have. But now you have the new students, they're narrating something on the Sheikh, and the older students, they're not narrating it. Right? You have reason for suspicion. You have a newer student, and he's a shining student. He's an exemplary student. And he is actually narrating something separate from the rest of the students. It is. There is suspicion that's behind it. Now, what are the chances that we can actually trust that report?
Maybe.
It's still possible, right? So as long as the realm of possibility is there, and that's what we're going to spend time on talking about today. On how does precision actually play a role? I wish there was a quicker way to do this. You guys following, right? No, I'm saying. This is the speed I move, right? 2.3. So if we understand that individual reports are of levels, so if we have an individual report, is every report equal? Like, is every lone report, can we say they're all equal? No, right? They're going to be different levels. Those levels can vary greatly. Not just that, the individual narrators within those reports, do those levels also vary? Right? So imagine if there's a high chance of this narration being accepted, and there's also a high chance that the narrator who's narrating it is very precise. Like it's very rare that this individual will make a mistake. The chances of me accepting that narration, what happens? It goes up. It's significantly higher. Again, was the goal of the muhaddithin to make sure that we had 100% certainty that this hadith was sahih? No. It was just to what?
Avoid mistakes.
Right, it was avoiding mistakes to minimize what? To minimize risk, right? That is the goal behind this. A lot of people, they think, no, the goal is, no, it's not 100%. Why? Because it's impossible. Nothing can be 100%. Nothing. So when we say the goal is to minimize it, is because they're trying to maximize the ascription to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And with that, you have the science that's called maratib al-ta'dil. And basically what that is that you would have scholars would grade these narrators. And they would say that this narrator is stronger than this one is more precise than this one was longer with the shaykh than this one. And all of these different levels, they would actually help grade and come to terms when we deal with these lone individual reports. So what do? So first they would look at the level of this lone narration. Is it worthy of being explored? So if I have a hadith that talks about, like we said, like zakat is 3%, and it's a lone report, is it worthy of being explored? No, not at all. Why? Right, it's going against the umum sharia. It's going against the sharia. So if it's not to be explored, then this is what we call a hadith munkar. This is what we call a hadith that is munkar, a hadith that is to be rejected. If it's worthy of being explored, what do you guys think the next step is now?
Is 100% explored? Are they trustworthy?
So trustworthy. Remember, what point are we at now?
What's the subject?
Precision. No, do they make mistakes?
Right now, we're talking about the level of the narrator. Right. So first, the level of the lone narration. That's the first thing that we look at. And if we find that, hey, this isn't even worth exploring, this hadith becomes munkar. This is at this point, this stops, or this is usually enough when it comes to historical accounts.
So this is what is being said, and then who's saying it?
Yes. Well, not just, this is the entire, what is being said. So this is more of what is being said, and this is who is saying it. Yes.
So the subject and then the person.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Over here, this is where this stops. When it comes to historical reports, when it comes to reports that have to do with praise, when it has to do with reports that have to do with encouraging people, as long as it is not munkar, in general, those historical reports will be accepted. Yes?
What if the subject, it's a lone report, but the subject, like you give example about a bird, a couple of, but a kid having a pet.
Yeah. Yes.
Is it worth going after?
Perfect. So over here, we had also talked about which narrations deserve more scrutiny.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
So the narrations that we said that we agree upon deserve the most scrutiny are what? Rulings. Things that have to do with halal and haram. Anything outside of those, you honestly don't have the same amount of scrutiny that goes behind it. As long as the meaning is correct, let it go. What do you guys say? Send it, right? So, so as long as you get to that point when it comes to a hadith that don't have to do with halal and haram, then at that point, is this hadith munkar? Does it go against all the other hadith, and is it something that's worthy of accepting at that point? But now when we have issues of halal and haram, I have to look at the level of the narrator. So over here, is he strong enough? And this is basically what the summary question is. Is he strong enough to support a lone narration? And that strength can come from multiple ways, right? So if he's not, then what do? Leave it. It's a rejected hadith. But it is not going to be called what? It's not going to be called munkar. Yeah, munkar is a rejected in a way that would never be accepted. It doesn't matter if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 of these reports; they can never come together to be accepted.
So it's false, basically.
Yeah.
It's false.
It will be rejected false. Like this is not something that can ever be used or accepted. Yes, if he is strong enough to hold this lone report, what do I do with the narration? If he said yes, if I look at him and be like, hey, this guy's precise, he's been with the sheikh for a long time, you don't find mistakes in his other narrations. So in general, it's accepted. In general, his narrations would be accepted. This study here of looking on, and even this, and I hope I don't confuse you guys by saying this, it can be the same narrator. How? Not, and I'm not even talking about difference of opinion. That's another layer altogether. Because some of his narrations might be accepted depending on the topic and depending on the sheikh, depending on the chain, and some of his narrations would be rejected.
So it depends on the subject of that word?
It can depend on a number of things. It can depend on the subject. It can depend on who he's narrating from. It can depend on who is narrating from him. So there are a lot of factors that go into grading these individual ahadith and these individual narrations. And inshallah, we'll try to talk about some of them.
So even though
Yeah.
it's rejected over there, could it be combined with another narrator to support the feature to be accepted? Or is that
So
it's not munkar?
at that point, it won't be what? Yeah, it's not munkar for sure. And if I do find a supporting chain, it's no longer a lone narration either. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So again, it depends on situations, depends on circumstances, and it also depends on supporting evidences. Some of the supporting evidences, like we said, okay, who's the teacher that he's narrating from? All right, this is a teacher that he sat with once, or this is a teacher he's been sitting with for like 4 or 5 years. Did he sit with this teacher before he had trauma? You guys remember mukhtalit? Yani, right? So I talked about the mukhtalitin, that these are individuals that some trauma happened in their life. They lost their books, they were in a fire, they fell off their horse, right? And these are things that are recorded. Or they just got old, right? So some people, they suffer from dementia. And some of the narrators, this happened to them. So this student who's narrating from him, did he narrate from him before the trauma, or did he narrate from him after the trauma? And even if he narrated from him after the trauma, to what extent did the trauma affect his narrations? Am I throwing too many variables out there? No? Okay. Huh? Yeah, that's, I mean, that's, I guess that's the way to... No, but you're not really building hadith, right? تفضل.
Yeah, so for example, if you declare hadith munkar,
Yeah.
but the ma'na has a lot of shawahid.
So here, let's go back. So we said here, if I have supporting, think about that. If I have meanings that support this lone narration, right? It's not the wording. Right? I have the meanings that support the lone narration. Is it worthy of being explored or no?
Not really, because they have those shawahid.
It is. Why? Because this is about the subject. You guys remember?
Yeah, subject.
So if the subject looks like, okay, well no, this is something that is in the Sharia.
Yeah.
Right? Or the Sharia is what? It's silent about it. We don't have anything about this. Is it something that's worthy being explored? Yes. I would say yes, it is. Okay. And then I would go through this process. But once it's munkar, khalas, ya akhi. Because once it's munkar, it's not worthy of being. We already determined that it's not worthy of being explored. Does that make sense? So you've already gone past this stage. Because had it been worthy of being explored, you would have started looking at the narrator and you would have started doing your investigations. Yes.
You mentioned that there was a subject that actually studied the narrators itself.
Yes.
A reliable source to look to.
Absolutely. So what would I use over here to determine the level of the narrator? There are a number of them. Yeah, I would go through Kutub al-Tarikh, I would go through Kutub al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, I would go into the books of what are called history, I would go into the books of what are called Jarh wa Ta'dil, which are disparagement and praise. I would go into books of Rijal, books of men, right? I would go into books that have to do with certain cities. So you have books that are like Tarikh of Dimashq or Tarikh Baghdad, like the history of Damascus and the history of Baghdad. And I think, did I mention this in the Muslim class? I think I mentioned it in the Muslim class. But when our history, like our Islamic history, if I go through and I collect the books that talk about Islamic history, what type of information will I find in those books? Okay, biographies of who? Of what? Of scholars. And who else? What other group of people? Politicians. Most of the world today, if you look in their history books, what do they tend to focus on?
Religious figures?
No.
No, government.
They focus on political figures. Most of the history of the world today is on political figures, what battles, what they fought, how they contributed, the different laws that they introduced, right? We have those in our history books too. But the additional portion that you will find in our history books too is a complete biographical account of who? Our religious scholars.
Celebrities.
Right, celebrities, Allahu Akbar. Right. And they were our celebrities, right? So like our religious scholarship, this is how it's recorded. And what does that say about the Ummah Islamiyah? What does that say about the Muslims in general?
We're focusing more on the scholars.
On scholars. I mean on knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah.
The focus and the importance we give, not to just any knowledge, but religious knowledge. Because we care about who the individuals were, who are taking it, and the ones that were propagating it, and the ones that were teaching it. So you have Khatib Baghdadi, he was from Baghdad, so he wrote a book called Tarikh Baghdad. He's like, I'm going to write about the history of my city. And he says in his introduction that I'm going to write about anybody who lived here, anybody who taught here, anybody who passed through here, anybody who narrates from people who were from Baghdad, because he loved Baghdad. Like this was a city where he was born and raised, so he wanted to write about the scholars in that place and in that time. And this is not strange. Like I said, and I think I also mentioned this in the Muslim class. Even up until the 12th century Hijri, not that long ago. You're talking about like 200 years ago, 300 years ago. You had a scholar, Imam al-Shawkani, where he has a book where he lists the scholars of his time, and he gives their biographical accounts. Again, the importance of knowledge within the Muslim tradition. The importance of knowledge in our history. In our, you know what I mean? Like this is our legacy. And this is how the Muslims preserved it, and this is how they carried it forward. So we said all of this depends on circumstances and supporting evidences. So here, I'm going to use a few case studies. So Imam Muslim, he brings a chain in his Sahih with a lone report from a later day reliable thiqa narrator named Hisham ibn Bihram. This individual, he dies 219 Hijri. So he's very what? He's very late, right? He's very late. So if he died 219, let's say that he died like maybe 60 years old, he was probably narrating hadith like 30, 40 hadith years before this. About maybe we're around 180 or so. How many people do you think were between him and the Prophet ﷺ? Maybe even more, right? Maybe even more. The Prophet ﷺ, when did he pass? Huh? Right? So he died 10 Hijri. So after him, when was the most famous companion who died the latest? It was Anas ibn Malik. Anas ibn Malik, I think he died 79 or 80. I don't remember. So you're talking about 100 years between him and the narration here. So what do you think? Maybe 2 or 3 people plus the companion? Is that reasonable? So you're talking about at least 3 or 4 people between him and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said his hadith was rejected simply due to being a lone report. Why? He said the narrator is a thiqa. He said the narrator is reliable. Possibility that there's somebody before him. What else?
The hadith contains an munkar.
Or the hadith, the subject, there's a problem with the subject. Yeah, there can definitely be a problem with the subject. But over here, he said that it cannot. Even though he is thiqah, his status is not such that he can what?
Push a munkar.
La. That he can support lone reports. Because even reliable narrators, we said that they're what? They're a spectrum. You have some that are ahfad, you have some that are awra, you have some that are stronger, you have some that are more religious, you have some that are adbat, that are more precise. And because you have that spectrum, where do you think this narrator stands? He's probably on the lower end of the thiqah spectrum. He's on the lower end of the reliable spectrum. So Imam Muslim says, as for the narration of Mu'afa ibn Imran on the authority of Aflah, on the authority of Qasim, on the authority of Aisha, then this is not a well-known report on Al-Mu'afa. Hisham ibn Bihram is the only one to narrate it, and he is from among the sheikhs. He is from among the sheikhs. Such hadith are not to be accepted if they are lone reports. Showing that when he says he's one of the sheikhs, he's not saying that he's from one of the imams. He's not saying he's from the huffaz. Right? These are very high praises for individuals. When he says he's from the sheikhs, the sheikh is a praise, but do you think it's a high praise? No. It's not a very high praise, which is why he's saying that this individual, yes, his narrations, if he had come with parallel narrations, his narrations would be what? They would be accepted. But because it's a lone report, this is enough reason for me to what? To reject it. Imam al-Dhahabi, he said an individual report from a honest or saduq narrator may be rejected. So he says, and note his use of honest. He doesn't, right? Of saduq. He also said, this is a lower status than that of someone who is thiqah. And look at when he died. He's 748. So now the science of hadith is more established. It's more grounded. There's more terminology. It's more precise, right? Before it was a little bit looser. Sometimes the terminologies would overlap, but now you have a lot more precision in how terms are being used. He says, if he is not of a station where this individual, he is not of a station where his loan reports would be accepted. Why? Because he's lower than the highest station of acceptance. And he also says, maybe. Right? He also says, maybe. To indicate that there are situations where the hadith would be accepted. That just because he is suduq, it doesn't mean that all his narrations will be rejected. So it is very possible that some of his narrations will be accepted. Yeah. Accepted, wallahu alam, I would imagine even Hasan or Sahih. I would imagine closer to Hasan because he's suduq, right? He's not thiqah, so he's not going to have the same martaba or have the same standing or position. So Imam al-Dhahabi, he goes on to say, he gives an example of Muhammad ibn Isa al-Matlabi, and this is the famous seerah author. He is saying that he is a praised example, especially concerning seerah. As seerah, what you guys know what seerah is? It's a prophetic biography. Prophetic biography. So Imam al-Dhahabi is saying that if you want to learn prophetic biography, that this is the guy. This is who you want to learn from. He says, as for hadith, concerning rulings, and again, this is something that is re-emphasized time and time again, then this hadith falls from the status of sahih to the status of acceptable, to hasan. Save lone reports, for they are rejected. Again, because his status is not such that can carry and hold, it has the power to hold these lone reports. This is what I feel concerning his condition. Imam Ahmed, he says, he reports from Abu Fadl Abbas al-Duri, where he said, I hear Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal when he was asked at the door of Abi Nadr, Hisham ibn Qasim, and it was said to him, Abu Abdullah. Abu Abdullah was Imam Ahmed's kunya. That was his nickname. His eldest son was named Abdullah. He actually went on to become a scholar. He's the one who narrates the Musnad. He's one of the first narrators of the Musnad of Imam Ahmed that we famously know. He says, what do you say about Musa ibn Ubaidah al-Rabadi and Muhammad ibn Ishaq? Muhammad ibn Ishaq is, again, the famous seerah narrator. He replied, concerning Muhammad ibn Ishaq, then these hadith should be recorded. meaning historical accounts. As for Musa ibn Ubaidah, then there is no issue with him except that he narrated munkar, a hadith, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Dinar, on the authority of Ibn Umar, on the authority of the Prophet ﷺ. And if they came with permissible and impermissible hadith, we deal with them like this. And then he proceeded, he made a fist with a thumbs up. What do you think he's saying about the narrator? No, he's not. That's actually not what...
Does the gesture have the same meaning?
So that's the thing. I looked for this, and because he says here, Musa ibn Ubaidah, he what? He's munkar al-hadith. He's munkar al-hadith. He says, so if he's munkar al-hadith, then if he talks about halal and haram, do you think that the hadith would be accepted? No. The hadith would be rejected. So he was like, and then he went like this. So I was like...
Is it a punch or is it a thumbs up?
So I don't know, like, you know, because the thing is there's a cultural context to all this. Interestingly enough, I was looking up in different cultures how thumbs up are used. Sorry, like, so you guys get to hear my tangent a little bit. In Roman culture, the thumbs up would,
Kill him.
yeah, and to, it's to actually kill them. Yeah, and this was to keep him alive, right? So this was to kill him, and this was to leave him. Is it possible that this, I felt, and again I could be wrong because I need more context and understanding some of these gestures that were used in different cultures and different societies. Is it possible he meant like a rein, you know, like a horse? Like, yeah, like pulling the horse rein. And it means that when we will what? If he records concerning these, we will what? We'll withhold. We're going to stop. I don't know. Again, like I just don't have enough cultural context to really understand. But it's clear it doesn't mean that he's good, right? Like that's clear. And it's funny because I was looking on some of the forums that were discussing this narration, and they were all like, "Oh, the thumbs up is from Islam," and I was like, "Bro, that's not what it means." Yeah, so there are actually two narrations like this. Abu al-Fadl was one, and I think there's actually a narration on Imam Ahmad, and both of them they do this, but they're not used in a positive way. So I'm not sure the hukta. No, I don't. So that's the thing. I was looking for narrations that talk about that. This is also, there's a way to. One of my friends, he wrote a book called Al-Adad and Al-Arab. So basically, because the Arabs didn't used to read and write, how did they advertise? You guys know?
Verbally and by hand.
They used to use hand gestures. So just imagine if you have a market and you're selling like wares, you know, you're selling oranges and stuff. So they would hold up like this, and this would mean like 10, or they would go like this, and like this means 9.
Flight attendant explaining everything.
I mean, that's a little bit different. Those are more gestures, but like these would be represent, like this would represent 5, like just like we do today. This would represent 4. This would represent 10. This would represent 9. You know what I mean? So they had different hand gestures. Yeah, I think this is 1, or no, it has to be like this or something. But so you guys know the hadith of 10. Have you ever heard this one? How to do tashahhud? Right? It's like this, right? So this would mean 10, right? I know in some cultures it has a different meaning, but like. So this would mean 10. So there are different hand gestures that symbolize different things. So saying this, is this used as, I don't think it's being used as a number, because he's like, you know, so could it be a punch? I think that's a definite possibility. Could it be like restraint? These are all, you know, again, this is all just conjecture from my end. I don't know 100%, but it definitely doesn't mean, yeah, he's great. You know, like keep narrating from this guy.
It's not like
Yeah. Abdullah ibn Imam Ahmad, and this is the same Abdullah I was talking to you guys about. He said concerning Ibn Ishaq, again, the famous seerah scholar, my father would gather his narrations. His father is who? Imam Ahmad. He said, I would gather his narrations, write many of his narrations, both the shorter and longer chains, and mention them in his masanid. Meaning that he would mention it in his father's musnad, noting that he never negated a single hadith. Who is he talking about here? Ibn Ishaq. So he's saying that I would record these hadith in my father's musnad. And my father, he wouldn't what? He wouldn't say anything. So it was said to Abdullah, did he rely on him? So somebody asked Abdullah, he said, well, you know, you wrote all these hadith down. Did your father rely on him? He said he did not rely on him for sunnah. He did not rely on him for halal and haram. Halal and haram. Halal and haram. So his individual accounts would be taken, but not concerning religious rulings. Yes?
What distinguishes that? Because most of the things, even the sphere,
Mm-hmm.
you narrate about the prophet's event in life. Right?
Yeah.
We can still maybe take some rulings.
Some rulings. So yeah. So the thing is that it gets a little tricky, and I definitely do agree with you. But in general. So for example, a physical description of the Prophet ﷺ, it's okay, right? It's not that big a deal. Or him performing certain actions, you can definitely maybe extract certain rulings. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he went to a graveyard, and there was a boy with him. The permissibility of boys to travel to graveyard. You know what I mean? Like, can you extract, like, I would say, branch rulings from it? I think so. But if you're extracting a direct ruling from it, Nahan Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or the Amar Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said don't do this, or the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said do this, I think this, in this scope, is where they'd be like, no, this we have to be very serious about. But just those extra benefits, I think they don't have a problem taking from them, and Allah knows best, because you already have the entire encyclopedia and corpus established for the things that are actually halal and haram. But if I have something in seerah that goes against one of those rulings, what do I do? Either I can reject it, or what do? I do something called ta'wil, which is what? I try to give some contextual explanation to what's going on. Khatib al-Baghdadi, the famous one I had mentioned earlier, he says concerning Ibn Ishaq, the Huffaz have agreed, I'm sorry? Okay. The Huffaz have agreed on not relying on his lone reports. And again, this is just re-emphasizes the rulings that we had mentioned previously. Khatib mentions this, knowing the praise that the scholars have for Ibn Ishaq and how they relied on his other reports. Ibn Ishaq is somebody who is praised throughout the books of Tariq. He's somebody who's praised amongst other scholars. But Khatib had no problem challenging that praise by mentioning that his lone reports were to be rejected, because he knew what that praise actually meant and it entailed. And then he mentioned that, especially concerning religious rulings. Imam al-Bayhaqi, he mentioned after Imam Ahmad stating concerning Ishaq, if he is not to be relied upon concerning halal and haram, are Allah's characteristics not more deserving? And over here, he's just making a comparison between that. Say, okay, well, if we have this, can we take his, if we're not taking his reports concerning halal and haram, can we take his reports concerning when he speaks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You have Abd ibn Sulaiman, he narrates on Abdullah ibn Mubarak concerning Ishaq, narrate on this man hadith. It was said he's weak. He says it is reasonable to relay on him this much or similar to these issues. Abd asks, similar to what? He said concerning manners, reminders, abstinence, and similar to it. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, another very famous hadith scholar, he said concerning Baqi ibn Walid, do not listen to Baqi affairs of sunan. Right? Sunan, again, halal and haram. But listen to him concerning reward and other than it. Abu al-Hasan al-Maymuni, he said, I heard Abu Abdullah, i.e. Imam Ahmad's... Thought I turned this on. Did somebody turn it back on? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la So Abu al-Hasan al-Maymuni, he said, I heard Abu Abdullah Ahmad say, Rishdin ibn Sa'ad is not one you should concern yourself over who he narrates from. He is a righteous man. What is he saying here about Rishdin? He wouldn't lie. So if he's saying that he narrated from so-and-so, then he's not lying about that. Haytham ibn Kharija, he ruled him to be reliable. He said that he's thiqah, right? He's reliable. So if he's saying that he narrated from him, he did narrate from him. As he was sitting in that gathering, so Abu Abdullah smiled and said, so this is Haytham ibn Kharija. He's sitting in the gathering and he hears Imam Ahmad say this. He hears Imam Ahmad say this. So Abu Abdullah, who is this? Abu Abdullah. This is Imam Ahmad himself. So Imam Ahmad, he smiled and he said, there is no harm in his hadith concerning raqa'iq, concerning heart softeners. So what is he really saying? Did he say that is he implying that he was thiqah, or what is he saying here? He's saduq. He's saying that he's a level less than thiqah. So it's very easy to fall into misunderstandings concerning narrators when you sometimes just look at things superficially, unless you understand the context and what it is that the scholars of hadith and the nuqad and the critics are actually talking about. As-Saji, he said concerning Yahya ibn Ubaydillah, ibn Abdullah ibn Mawhib, his narrations are permitted in zuhud, in abstinence, and heart softeners, but he is no authority in religious rulings, in ahkam. Again, this is a theme we see time and time again. So the last section, and again, so this helps us grade and determine on whether these narrators can actually carry tafarrud, they can carry these lone reports, or they can't. This is one criteria that we had mentioned. The next criteria, inshallah, that we're going to talk about next time is the tabaqa. The tabaqa, we said, is the level of the narrator. And we said that there is more likely to be lone reports at what level? At the beginning, when it comes to the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the further down we go in levels, the less chance there is for these individual, for these lone reports. And Allah knows best. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi sahbihi wa sallam. Any questions?
You said tabaqa is level of the report?
Yes. So it can be the level of the narrator. It's the level of the narrator, like where he is in the chain. Inshallah, we'll have the tazkiyah class after Salatul Isha. Salatul Isha is in about 10-15 minutes, inshallah.
So why are there fewer later? Is it because there's fewer narrators?
So think of it like a pyramid. So imagine if you have like one companion, is it possible that he just met the Prophet ﷺ maybe a handful of times and he takes one narration from him? So now you have a bunch of people who are narrating from him, and then a bunch of people who are narrating, you know what I mean? Like, what are the chances that you have a lone report surviving all the way, you know, I mean, for that long? It's very low. Is it impossible? No. But it's very limited.
Is that also why we don't have a lot of lost books of hadith or anything like that?
So we do, because through history what's happened is that like you've had the Mongols, right? They came and they destroyed Baghdad. They say that Baghdad ran black, like the Euphrates ran black that day, because it was just because of the Ain Jalut was, I don't remember. Ain Jalut was a different battle. I don't. Was it the Mongols?
It's related to the Mongols.
Okay. So basically what happened is like you have the Mongols come in, they destroy libraries. Right now in Damascus, the library was destroyed because of a shot. You know what I mean? Like, so you have these events throughout history where you lose books. Like you lose a lot of books. Even they say, and again, I'm not really sure where they got the statistics from, but they're saying like only out of our entire Islamic civilization and history, 1% of our books have been published. Yeah. Saying that, can we say that there are hadith that have been lost to us? No. There are chains that have been lost, but not hadith.
So even those that were burned were from the 1%, the books that were burned.
I mean, if they're published, how could we publish them if they're burnt? The ones that are lost, they're lost. Khalas. I mean, you have to understand, because how do you even know what books are lost? You have scholars referring to books that you just don't know where they are.
Oh, so there could be more books that they didn't refer to.
Yeah. And some of the benefit of later day books is that you actually find them quoting from earlier books, and that book is gone.
We need to know for it.
I mean, I guess.
Because some knowledge, like...
So you said that there's not, even though those books are lost, we have lost hadith, and that's because they were referred to, they've been preserved through other chains?
They've been preserved in books. So meaning that all the texts that we have from the Prophet ﷺ, everything has reached us. But is it necessary that every chain has? No.
So you're saying that just like the Quran is considered complete, are you saying the hadith are complete?
I believe the hadith corpus to be complete.
Okay. Even though we've lost pieces
Yeah, yeah,
cases of
absolutely.
copies of it.
No, it's because you have to understand that even the major scholars of hadith, when they compiled, what did they do? There are many chains that they removed. They're like, okay, it's extraneous. Like this is just reinforcing an idea that I'm already trying to present. So each level of that, every time there was a recording of it, people stopped worrying about the chains.
They reinforce the chain when they did it.
Exactly. So because once it was recorded, it was recorded. There was no need to like reinvent the wheel. And all of the major works of hadith, you have sections of books of loan reports that have been lost, but you don't have the major works of hadith in Islam. Those have not been lost because there's so many copies of them versus books of scholars, right? So there might be individual scholars, some scholars give it more importance, some don't. Even Khatib Baghdadi himself, when he heard the Mongols were coming, he left. He took part of his library with him because he knew he couldn't take the whole thing. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.